All right, today we're here to talk about MMWD. They have recently announced a proposed rate increase. I'm sure that's why many of you are here to hear more about that. This is intended to pay for an estimated $238 million 10-year capital improvement project. The proceeds will be used to maintain, upgrade, rehabilitate, and build resilience into MMWD's existing and aging assets, as well as provide a greater investment in wildfire protection, or prevention, I should say, on Mount Tam and on the district's watershed lands. The agency proposes to fund this program by imposing a fee on property owners' tax bills, increasing amounts that would depend on the parcel water meter size as opposed to usage volume. There has been some opposition to this proposed tax increase. We have a perspective that will be presented here by a representative of COST, the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers. So let me introduce our two speakers, MMWD General Manager Ben Horenstein. Ben is the General Manager of MMWD. He has more than 30 years of experience as a water professional. He worked most recently for the City of Santa Rosa as Director of Water. He previously served as the Director of Wastewater and Recycling for the East Bay Municipal Utility District, as well as with the City of Los Angeles, working for the Bureau of Sanitation. He holds a bachelor's degree from University of Florida in the field of engineering, environmental engineering, and he pursued graduate work in environmental studies at Loyola Marymount University and Vermont Law School. Our own Paul Premo will speak after. He is a member of the board of the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers, as well as the Marin Coalition Board. COST is a nonpartisan volunteer tax-exempt organization that represents the interests of Marin taxpayers and special district fee payers. Paul worked for Chevron for 27 years, starting in engineering, followed by positions in financial analysis and management, and executive positions including corporate secretary and treasurer of Chevron USA. He's been an energy consultant for the past 27 years since leaving Chevron, and he has consulted for major corporations in the regulation of natural gas, electricity, and interstate oil pipeline industries. He also serves as the sommelier of the Marin Coalition. So, without further ado, let me introduce first Ben Horenstein, MMWD.
Thank you, Scott. I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation. The staff and board of MMWD are trying to get out to every possible venue we can to talk about this and proposed rate increase and respond to questions. And I understand certainly that there are a number of questions. Today I will certainly present the rate increase, but also a bit of context to help folks appreciate what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how your money would be spent. I did, just a quick note, I did pause when I saw the agenda a number of weeks ago, because what I've seen, I wouldn't want the audience to mistake this as the MMWD position and the public position, because we've really gotten vast range of perspectives from the public, many in support what we're doing. We established a community advisory panel that formally asked the board to enact a higher rate increase than is currently proposed. So there really are all over the map, as you would expect, and there are, extreme positions. That said, I'm here, and I am pleased to be here, and I have gotten to know Paul and Mimi, the president of COST, very well as we go to city councils, and they have their chance to provide their perspectives on what we're sharing. Some of you may be aware, but if not, I'm relatively new to the organization, about 5 months or so, and I've spent little else than delving into pretty much 7 days a week into the finances to really understand, to be able to or not support what you're going to hear today. And I am supporting it. As a professional with a good reputation in the industry, that's important for me, not to sell it because that's my perceived job, because I don't see it that way. But in looking into the organization, some of what I have found is it's a very lean organization for the work it does in relative to comparable agencies in terms of kind of staffing numbers and funding. The rates of the district are on the very low end of comparable agencies. And I know that doesn't explain the recent rate hikes and the impact to you and other customers. And I'm not trying to make excuses for that. I'm just sharing my perspectives based on my review. We do need to, in a very dramatic way, continue and increase the investment in our infrastructure. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But it is a very significant amount of investment that will go on for decades. As all public agencies that are entrusted with public assets and infrastructure are finding as they show their age, and you know, the booms of the 20s and 30s and 50s, the infrastructure is getting old and needs to be renewed. We also need to continue and more so invest in the watershed. It's a daunting responsibility we have generally to maintain the quality of water we're so privileged to have here, but to also address, of course, the growing threat due to changes in the climate situations in terms of wildfires, and it is particularly, as everyone here knows, pronounced in this community given the nature and topography and the like. And I come from, you heard Santa Rosa, and I went through the event there, so that for me is particularly notable. Even as I say it, my hair is standing up a bit. So I am very focused on that issue, as the board and the organization is. So I'll move to my slides at this point. They come from a recent workshop we gave. I do see there were just a handful of folks there. I see one face, a couple that were there, so I hope it's not repetitive for many of you. There we go. So we do have a complex system of course, the majority of our water. Some people have actually said in context of this rate increase that the water's free, why are you? And to bring it to you, right, is very complex. But anyway, we have 2 treatment plants that treat the water from the 7 reservoirs where we capture it on the mountain. That is supplemented with some water from the Russian River, about 20%. And it goes through 900 miles of pipeline, storage tanks that you're aware of on the hillsides. We do have some small amount of recycled water, and it meets you. Collectively, the replacement value of this infrastructure is well north of $2 billion. And to put that in context, our capital program that this fee is supporting is about $20 million a year, right? So 1% of the replacement value, and the average age of our facilities is 60 years, with many parts of the system far older than that. So we've been challenged by the 7-member community advisory panel based on a deeper dive into the infrastructure that we are not investing enough. And that's where their proposal to the board came of the rates should be higher. I'm not advocating for that, I'm just sharing it. This is a quick look at our infrastructure, but if you look at the number of connections as it compares to others and the number of miles of pipes, tanks, and pump stations, we have a very high number of those tanks and pump stations and even miles given the number of connections. And that's largely attributed to the topography here. Again, living in paradise, but that it's difficult to bring water up hills, down valleys, and it just takes a lot of infrastructure. And that infrastructure is showing its age, and we do need to invest in it. So you may know we're 105 years old, maybe I'm slightly off here, but we want to be here, of course, for the next 100 years as well. And we will be. So this shows a little more specifically the percent of our key systems that are older than 50 and older than 75 years. You know, we could continue. We do have some pipes well over 100 years. But anyway, it is a reality that the system is aging. And it's not just it's old. It's showing its age through, I probably get 3, 4, maybe more emails a week from customers saying, we had another break in the line in our street. When are you going to replace that? And we're going to get to it. It costs us about $1.5 million per mile to replace pipe. It's just infrastructure is costly, and that's part of this whole proposal going forward to deal with this. Some of our pipes are still cast iron, which is circa 70, 80 years ago. The challenge is now we know no one puts in cast iron pipe because it does tend to be brittle. It was thought to be the material, you know, of choice back in the 20s and 30s. And we're working to get all those out. You can see, as I noted, about $1.5 million per mile. So 300 miles, $1.5 million, right? That's 450 miles. This 10-year capital program, which includes pipes, tanks, pumps, is $220 million, something like that. So we won't even get to all of this really old pipe that is failing, you know, daily with breaks, and we go and patch, and you can only patch so much. But we're working hard and doing good work, and I think making responsible decisions in terms of the priority of our capital investments going forward. So the 10-year CIP, whoops. Seismic, this is looking back, I believe. This is looking forward. Thank you, Emma. We're going to be hitting 50 miles, seismically upgrading some aspects of the treatment plant, Ross Reservoir, and these two reservoirs feed a dominant part of our customers. This looks beat up in a photo. If you'd see this reservoir, which is a key part of our distribution system, your questions would probably say, why is it taking you so long to get there? And it's not really an outlier. It represents the challenges we face in terms of the investment needs we have, balanced by keeping the rates affordable and reasonable to the customers. And of course, wildfire risk, you know, it's something all of you are very aware of. We have many structures within 1 mile and 2 miles, right? Thousands of homes, largely. We're rated as a top-tier fire risk in the watershed. The fuel loads have increased due to invasive species, all kinds, you know, not allowing fires to burn. You've all heard, you know, I'm sure some of the stories of why it's more pronounced now and why the North Bay has been seeing those fires, or Southern California, and we do need to jump on it as we're doing, in part funded through this fee that's part of this proposal. A full range of activities that we do to reduce the fuel load, and that really is a big part of it, right? Naturally, the fuel load would be reduced through wildfires that would blow through the lands every 5, 10 years, but right? As a practice, we put them out. So anyway, it's going in and tearing up the understory, experimenting with goats, and you see goats on the hillsides, and looking at prescribed, working with county fire on prescribed burns. So a range of activities, but again, similar to the replacement of our water pipes, this is costly. And we're increasing the budget to do this, but only within the capability of our rate structure. We have about 1,000 acres of fuel breaks, 100 miles of emergency road access. We have some measure of fire response and trained rangers that can respond. A lot of vegetative management, and that was really the last slide of the different ways we're trying to manage this fuel load through vegetation management, and we continue to enhance the coordination. And recently, folks may have seen the grand jury's report that just came out that was advocating for a more formalized, coordinated effort. Gave you a plug here. The watershed budget is going up largely for these activities I mentioned, and again funded largely through this proposed capital maintenance fee that I'll get to in a minute. But there's a tremendous number of other activities. Just one example, and it's pretty costly, the fishery program that we have where we tag fish and count fish and enhance their habitat. That's a mandate. That's not a voluntary activity we do. It's a mandate as part of the water rights that we have to make sure we secure those so we can supply the customers with water. So a lot of activities go on that many folks, of course, understandably don't see and aren't fully connected to. This, to me, is a very important slide. This is comparable agencies bi-monthly for single-family residents, but it's a way to look at apples to apples to the extent you can, which is not perfect, but when you have a pretty good data set, it's a reasonable way to look at it. And here's where we are here. Among the very lowest, this is today, of customer rates. And in fact, the ones south of us that are lower than our rates are ones that generally don't have their own water supply, don't have their watershed to manage. Comparable agencies, if we really looked at apples to apples, it would be even a more dramatic picture. The second blue bar is where we will be with the proposed rate increase, somewhat still in the middle. And much of the impact is a year-to-year impact as we shift from debt funding to cash funding the program. And so in subsequent years, we'll be moving downward, and I think find a pretty good resting spot close to where we are now. But this is what the data shows today. This shows historical rate increases from the district. It's something like 14 years out of the last 25, there was no rate increase. Some argued that that was not prudent. Others understand it was to some extent in reaction to the public. But nonetheless, if we had increased rates at inflation, we'd be higher than where we are with this proposal. So since I believe it starts at 1990, on average, rates have gone up lower than inflation. You know, personally, sure, I'd rather see just have done inflation versus having to, you know, have the year-to-year impact that you all are seeing from this proposed increase. This line up here is also interesting. That comes from a every 2 years, the National Association does a rate survey, and this would be our rates had we gone up at the average increase that national agencies have gone up. I don't know, everyone can take away, different things from this, but for me, what it really shows is all water utilities are facing similar challenges in terms of the need to invest in their infrastructure, address increasing costs, and just trying to grapple with the many challenges, regulatory and otherwise, that we're being faced with. This is, on a percentage basis, our budget, where the money goes. Most of it, water treatment, distribution, capital, pipelines, facility, watershed. So about 3/4 are, as you would expect and hope, core business activities that relate directly to bringing the water to you. Debt service is a piece here, and certainly there's a debate of should we continue in debt or move to this direction of pay-as-you-go or cash funding the capital program. All I can say in my experience is if you continue to do debt at the level we were doing it, which essentially is funding 100% of our capital program, while prudent in the way we did it, I believe, of taking advantage of the historically low interest rates, it's really not sustainable for the sort of ongoing year in, year out bread and butter capital investments. Everyone knows, and personally, if you build up the credit card, right? And it's real, and that debt can really explode on you, and you find yourself paying a lot of money in interest and debt that's crowding out your day-to-day operational needs. So, to the rate proposal, as I noted, invest in the infrastructure, invest in the watershed, ensure you have water 24/7 when you open the tap, of course, high quality. There's two parts to it. One is a bit less controversial, 4% annual for the next 4 years to address inflationary pressures and increasing operational costs. And then this capital maintenance fee. And that's to fund both the gray infrastructure, the pipes, pumps, tanks, and the investments, the additional investments in the watershed. This is not a new capital program. This is going to be funding. This is a program that's been going on at a similar level for years. It's shifting from debt funding it to cash funding it, which is creating this year-to-year impact. I'm throwing a lot at you, but we'll have time for questions. This is the capital maintenance fee. You may have seen it in the 218 notice. Residential, this shows a percent of customers based on the meter size. I'll probably wait if there's questions on why meter size, that comes up. It is a very standard industry practice to use meter sizes as a way to indicate current or future demand on the system and apportion your fixed costs, very much so the infrastructure investments you make based on the meter size. The impact to the average customer, as described below, as the average customer, is the 4% is $271 a month. The fee is $1363 a month. Again, this is for 5/8 meter, doesn't apply to everyone, certainly. Questions have come up, and briefly, affordability. This is a big rate increase. The board has directed staff in the ordinance that will be going forward to them to increase the capture of low-income residents through modifying the program from 60% of low income based on HUD to 80% with the eye towards 100%, and also implementing a new Super Saver water program to continue to support conservation and also in some ways may address affordability if there's overlap there. Meter size, the board has instructed staff on that there are cases where folks have had to upsize their meter for non-discretionary reasons, namely fire sprinklers. If you remodel a house, it can trigger a requirement for interior sprinklers that could trigger a larger meter. In those cases, we'll have a process to account for that and go to a lower fee. Year-to-year impact, the board is considering and wanted more information, but indications that they may very well move in this direction for a phase-in, maybe a 5-year phase-in of this fee to lessen this year-to-year impact for both residential customers and businesses and schools that haven't anticipated or budgeted for it. There were concerns of putting it on the property tax bill in terms of it's hard to track how much I'm paying for water, even are you trying to hide it on the property tax bill, and those kind of accusations have come at us. So the board has directed staff to move forward with, at least for the first 2 years, to put it on the bi-monthly bills that customers receive now so they can see this fee, and there'll be hopefully less concerns about this idea of transparency. And then lastly, there's been some public process. This all came at it quickly. I'm not denying, that perspective, yet to share upwards of 20 public meetings starting about a year ago at board meetings and publicly noticed committee meetings that led to where we are. We can always do more, and we will, in terms of improving our communication, improving access to information on our website. We've got a lot of good feedback. Yes, the board's even looking at videotaping meetings, and I understand that, I've seen that to be a concern of folks. So I think we are hearing some of the concerns, and the board does appear to be doing, in my view, work to address those while trying to move this forward. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Paul Premo, ready to go.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I should have told you. Order a cold meal. We have been involved in this process since we first learned of it, which was, frankly, just 2 months ago. Ben did mention that for about a year now that this issue has been considered, apparently, by the board and the staff, well, unbeknownst to us, which, again, is part of the concern we have about not videoing their meetings. They're almost unheard of for an entity in our county that has a $100 million budget not to video their meetings. And not just video them, but stream them live so the people who are interested and affected by what they do have an opportunity to know what's going on and participate with that knowledge. Okay, who are we? What does it cost? We're a nonpartisan taxpayer and fee payer representative for the county of Marin. And what do we define as a sensible fee or a sensible tax? We put up here 4 of the criteria that we look at. That it be affordable to the people who pay it. That it be fiscally responsible. That is, it be justified, that other alternatives have been considered, and that it is not excessive to cover whatever the matter is that the tax or the fees are to cover. It should be fair in that the people who pay it, either through taxes or service fees, are paying a fair share for the service or the the goods that they receive for the service, and that it be transparent, that we know how it has been justified, what it is for, and that it's been well communicated to the people who pay it. The proposal that was originally made available and which was mailed to its customers fails on all of these points. It is not affordable. It's a huge increase, especially for the 1-inch meter people. An extra $400, $409 a year is what you're being asked to pay. And that's about $70 a bill above what you're presently paying. 20% of the water district's customers have 1-inch meters. It should be fiscally responsible. Well, they have funded 10 years of capital investment, $200 million, with primarily debt. They still have, and I applaud it, a very high credit rating, AA, the second highest available, and it's undiminished by the debt they have taken on. They have room to borrow more, and interest rates are now continuing and are forecast to continue at very low historic rates. And I mentioned earlier, transparency. The meetings weren't publicized broadly. The minutes are very sparse, and just generally not available to the public. So we urge a protest, and we have forms out on the table that are easily filled out to register your protest. And Mimi points out the yellow. Okay. Yeah, they're supposed to be mailed, and the information is on there. Okay, we deserve a better plan. The current proposal is reverse Robin Hood. By that I mean that it's a constant monthly or bi-monthly bill amount. If you've been a conserver of water, or you use less water than the average, you still have to pay as much as people who use multiples of your usage, and this flies in the face of years of urging of conservation, rightly so, by MMWD. The fees should be spread across all payers. Exemptions have been provided by what are called private fire lines. These are large metered emergency fire lines that institutions like hospitals, maybe some schools, we've asked for who they are, we don't know yet, but 3,000 of the customers are excused from this bill. Now, the water district says the meter size is being used because they have to size their system on some assumption that you would open up every device you have that uses water and flows at the maximum the meter would allow. Well, first of all, it also assumes implicitly, simultaneously, every one of their 60,000 customers would be taking water at the most they could provide. Now, surely they don't design their system for that particular capacity, but having said that, they are exempting, for example, the private fire lines that I mentioned. So that doesn't spread the cost across all payers. And we agree we should equitably fund the water district's infrastructure, just as they have been doing. This is, as Ben mentioned, this is not new. This is not incremental investment. This is a continuation at the level they've been at for many years. I put up here what the impact would be for everyone with these size meters. To show the absurdity of it, or the unfairness of it, the 20% of customers of theirs, 12,000 customers who have 1-inch meters, are getting a 150% increase in their bill attributable to this fee, but they only average 80% of the usage increase. So it's not been well thought out on the fairness side. It's bigger than it should be because they're assuming no debt. Now, the rationale for not using debt is somebody's claim that paying interest, as you would do on debt, is undesirable. But in fact, to recover $200 million in 10 years, instead of financing it over 30 years, costs you much more currently per year than it would under debt financing. So you'd have a lower average bill if you debt financed it, and you'd also address the fact that you're paying for long-lived assets, long beyond the 10 years, or whatever number of years, if this extends, that you're being asked to agree to it. The proposal was developed in the dark, as I said. 2 months ago, it came out pretty much a baked cake. And it hasn't changed much since then. What you were mailed is very much what was agreed upon by the board at their meetings just 2 months ago. And putting it on the property tax bill, I think, is unprecedented. And it adds to the pressure of other jurisdictions who want to raise money that will be placed on the property tax bill. $409 a year is noticeable on your property tax bill. And even the $169, but more importantly, it's untied to your water usage, has been acknowledged. A simple way to do this would be to put it all against your water usage. If you use less, you pay less. If you use more, you pay more. They want $16.5 million in the first year. They have customers' aggregate consumption is 10 million CCF. Simple arithmetic, 16.5 divided by 10 is $1.65. Charge everybody $1.65 for every CCF they use. If you don't get the 16.5 million in the year that you're looking for, carry the shortfall forward to the next year. If you get more, reduce the amount you charge the next year. This is commonly done in the electric and natural gas regulated industries with what we call balancing accounts and tracking accounts. You're allowed to get a certain amount from your customers. If you don't get it, you get it next year, or you could get it over 3 or 4 years by amortizing it if it's large enough. So here's what we offer as a fair solution, we believe. Conduct a new process that involves the public and its ratepayers. Get agreement among your constituents. Issue a new property tax notice, Prop 218 notice, which is what the document you all received in the mail is all about. That's our approach. It's simple and it's fair. Now that's about the CMF. I won't go through this one, it's too cluttered. There's additionally a 4% a year rate increase that's apart from this CMF, or this capital management maintenance fee element, and that's simply to recover the costs of their basic operations unrelated to capital that are assumed to grow at 4% per year annually out into the future. And I put in perspective here some of the numbers about their operating expenses. The rate revenues will rise from $77.7 million under the current rates that you're paying, and with the 4% a year, it will grow to $94.5 million. And again, that's excluding the capital investment fee component. So that's about a 22% increase that they're proposing in this particular document that be approved. I mentioned for perspective, and not surprisingly, personnel expenses are the largest portion of the operating expenses, including salaries and fringe benefits. Of those other numbers are forecast to grow from $48 million to $59.8 million, or 24% over that period of time. And the 4% is meant to partially recover, or more than recover, that element of their costs. Pensions. It's a word we're unfortunately getting very familiar with. They contribute, right now, they cost $7.7 million in the current fiscal year and are projected to grow to $12 million, and they account for 35% of the increase in the personnel expense growth, for nothing more than covering the inadequate earnings of the existing pension fund assets. It's more than 10% of the budget, and basically employee salaries are what drive pension costs. A percentage of your salary is what has to be contributed to the pensions, plus an allowance for the under-earnings of the funds that are being managed for the pensions. So control of these costs is obviously critical. Healthcare benefits are another very expensive element of employee compensation, and also for retirees. So control of these costs is critical. They're a major source of the 4% per year compounded rate increase is being proposed. And that's our position on this. I look forward to questions. Thank you. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. All right, now we turn it over to you. Paul, why don't you turn that other mic on, if you don't mind? Just hold the thing down. We invite you to give us your questions, your thoughts on this. Kindly be succinct in what you want to say so that we can get to everybody, and we'll walk around the room.
Yeah. This one's yours.
We got it.
I get it. Oh, okay.
Thank you very much for coming out here. I enjoyed seeing you last week, Thursday also. I have two questions. Where is the pension debt illustrated in your pie chart for the distribution of funds from your gross budget? And two, where can I review the 3,000 plus exemptions, identifying who those exemptions are? Thank you.
Let me just briefly clarify the exemptions. These are for fire lines, for schools, for this establishment. The fire line feeding these sprinklers is likely a dedicated fire line, and the capital maintenance fee doesn't apply to it. The reason is, in all likelihood, 99 point, you go out some decimal points, it will never be utilized. It's only here in the remote occurrence that there's an interior fire to save, obviously, life and property, and it would be very intermittent in nature. So it does not add to the demand on the system like other connections and uses, and not including these fire lines is very consistent in practices across the country. For example, most folks, for connection fees, it's based on the size meter. But fire lines are, to my knowledge, always or most often excluded from that. You asked specifically, essentially it's every single commercial, industrial institution in our service area. We don't have the list. We've never had it, and we did pull together on request for schools so they can see the fire lines and how the meter, how the fee would play. Of course, they're very supportive, as you can understand, of not including fire lines, but that's not why we're doing it. We believe it's the right thing to do. We also have it for cities. So those are the two things that we've extracted from our database. We do have all the gross numbers, but it gets complicated because we aren't able to give out customer information and the like. So we have had that request, and we haven't dedicated the time to do the work to pull that. On the pension on my slide, I'm not exactly sure where it falls. I think there's an administrative or overhead section, and that's where it would be. I do want to say, because it's not always understood in pensions, absolutely, from a public servant standpoint, is you're always on the defensive with pensions inherently. The average pension that the district pays out to retirees today, the average pension today is about $34,000. So, you know, and everyone can decide if that's an extravagant annual payment or not to retirees. And, you know, there's a lot of ways you can slice and dice it, but that is where we are. We also benefit, as all public agencies in California do, through the Pension Reform Act. And an increasing number of our employees, given this retirement bubble we're in, are on the new program that's much more restrictive than what we call the classic pension program. And we do, I think it was good legislation, and the public benefits from that over the long term.
Can I just add one thought? The logic that underlies using the meter size for the capital investment recovery is based upon the theory that I mentioned, that the watershed has to, or the total system has to be able, in theory, to meet the demands of every water meter being turned on at full blast, and the probability of of an event occurring, that would ever occur, has got to be zero or damn close to it. And the same logic, however, should apply to the private fire lines. If you accept that concept, sure, they may never need to flow at the full rate that they're designed to flow, but the system has to be designed for the event that it might happen. I'm not saying that that's proper or that it's the case, but that is the theory.
Well,
that underlies all
neither,
this.
Paul, are accurate, and we can go on for this for some time, but it's simply not accurate, much of what you've said. But specifically here, the assumption is not that all the fixtures get turned on. The assumption is we don't make decisions on the meter size. The architect, the engineer, the customer makes decisions on meter sizes. So a 3-bedroom home that has a 5/8 inch meter has made the decision based on consulting with their engineers and architects when they built their home, how much water their home may need. And the very large 4,000 square foot home obviously came to a different conclusion. Anyone can, and we're going to be publicizing it, can downsize their meter. So if there's a point of dispute, it would be if that large home is using much less water, should they be investing in the infrastructure that supports their larger meter? The reason you use meter size is today, they may have had folks move out, a larger family. In a few years, they sell, and there's another large family in that home. And if they decide not to reduce the size of that meter in that very large home, everyone else would effectively be subsidizing them, because we have to assume over the long term that the demand will be reflected based on the connections, the orifices that are tapped into our system that reflect the need of our customers. What was the other point?
Well, you said I lied on both of them.
No, I didn't. I
wasn't
never,
true. It wasn't true.
ever
It
would
wasn't true.
say
You just said
Paul lied.
you
I
just-
said you were inaccurate.
Okay,
So
all right.
I have great respect for Paul. He is not a water professional. He is not a rate consultant that we hired, national rate consultants. He is a very smart man, and I have a lot of respect for him, and I do not intend in any way to suggest otherwise.
Oh, I'm compensated for that. I'm a master's degree chemical engineer from MIT. I've studied a lot of hydraulics in my life. I'm not ignorant of orifices, and I'm not going to go further than that.
I
On
didn't
your
set
meter.
this dynamic up. Paul set this dynamic up.
Well,
so
I'm trying
playing
to
the
answer
part.
the question about the exemptions being provided for the private fire lines. And you just said, basically, that you have to be available to meet the demand of those customers. And bottom line is, I think it's a very poor parameter to change to right now, after all the years that you've never done it, and the consequences on less than average water users is significant. I use about 1/3 in my house, 1/3 of the average water consumption that you put in for your 5/8" customers. My increase as a result is 45% increase in my bi-monthly bill. And I'm not alone. People that have the 1-inch meter, many of whom do use only 5 to 10 CCF per billing period, are looking at a 70% increase in their bill. So if you didn't do it, if you could do it on usage, you would recover all the costs and you would do it fairly. And I urge you to do it that way.
Private fire lines, let me just,
Sure.
are generally akin to fire hydrants. They're used infrequently in the event of an emergency. The system is designed generally for demand in August, right? Peak water demand, irrigation, that's the basis of sizing our tanks, sizing our pipes, and ensuring water supply. The intermittent, infrequent use of a given hydrant doesn't really drive those things. Yeah, it would use some water for sure, but it does not impact the overall context in a master planning of infrastructure in terms of peak demand on the system.
Okay, let's move on.
Let's get some other questions.
Go ahead, Basha.
Yeah, you mentioned you were at the low end of the rates. Well, out of the 17 water districts, we're the 6th highest, according to your graph there. So we're not at the low end, are we?
Well,
Yeah.
yes, I was indicating today, right, there were 2 bars that today we're at the low end. With the proposed rate increase, it does bring us more to the other part of the spectrum,
Yeah.
yes.
I was looking at the budget sheet, and it looks like 44% of your total budget goes to personnel services. Is that normal for the other districts?
I'm not familiar with all of them. am familiar with East Bay Mud and the city of Santa Rosa. I believe for East Bay Mud it would be higher than that. We do a bit more contracting than they do in terms of construction. But yeah, this is a labor-intensive business in terms of the crews in the field responding to breaks, tying in new customers. It does take a lot of staff manpower, engineers that manage the capital program, scientists in the laboratory to ensure the quality of the water, meeting regulations, and on and on. But yes, it is very comparable.
Can
Okay,
I
we have a
comment
question over here.
on one part of that, though, very quickly? The North Marin Water District is looking for, I think, a 5% increase in their rates. And in the letter that they sent out to explain it to their customers, they included a chart that showed for, I think, maybe 20 water agencies in the Bay Area for an average residential consumer of water, and I think it's a 19 CCF per 2-month billing period, and ours is 17 at the 5/8 centimeter size, that with this increase, based not at all on usage, but entirely on a fixed element of your bill, MMWD will have the highest rate that is unrelated to usage for an average user of customers in the entire Bay Area. So they may be 6, I think Basha mentioned, in that chart you showed. But you're going to be number 1. Unfortunately, we're going to be number 1.
You
And what
said
we
that's
have to pay.
unrelated to usage?
That's right, and the
Okay.
component, just the component that is.
So it's not inconsistent necessarily with the chart we had. It's just
I'm not
pulling
saying it
out
is,
a
but
piece
it's
of the
looking
rate.
at it with your
I
new
see.
rate, with your new rate structure,
I see.
which you propose to put entirely independent of usage. according to the mailer that we're all, the 218 mailer, you will be far the highest, and I urge you to take a look at it if you, it's, MMWD is pointing out that their rates, with their increases, will put them only around the median of all of the water usage agencies in the Bay Area. Thanks.
So there are a lot of issues there. I'll make a comment first that probably the most important thing I wanted to say to you is that I think that addressing the fire danger is very significant, very important, and will be very costly.
Yep.
But it would be much more costly if we don't address it.
Sure.
And so, and we all benefit in many ways from the beautiful piece of land that's right in the middle of our county that's so well managed by MMWD. And so I think that paying whatever it takes to be able to manage that well. We're in our towns, I'm in the town of Fairfax, and we are also stepping up to a lot higher level of managing fire risk. And that's costly, and it has some public implications, and we're doing it because we have to.
I think we all agree.
So that's
I think we all agree on
important.
that. It's just how you recover the cost. You have a question?
And just a quick comment regarding this discussion that you've been having. I do think that there's a logic to the idea of using the meter size as essentially a proxy for usage. So I think that makes sense, and it would make sense, therefore, to exempt fire hydrants and fire flow. That comes to the question, which I think is, as I understand, is a pretty fundamental thing, and I'm sure you have thought about it a lot, of the kind of a conflict between the fact that a water district can try to and succeed at times in getting people to conserve in their usage, which is a benefit to all of us for many reasons, but at the same time, the more successful you are at that, the lower your revenue is. And so that's a fundamental problem with, I think it's totally fair, and it would seem on the outset that it would make sense to just charge people for the water they're using and that's it. But that's what the problem is with that, is that you get into that problem. So how have you thought that through? And
It's a challenge industry-wide of, and more so here, because we look at water conservation essentially as our supplemental water supply. We're very reliant on the atmospheric rivers coming, and if anyone can forecast 20 years from now, is the pattern going to hold, right? So conservation in this community is absolutely critical. And certainly a piece of that could be just loading up the entire rate structure, a dominant, and it is still pretty high on usage alone. And every time you turn the tap, the challenge with that is you were alluding to, then we kick off the next conservation program, water usage goes down, and we say, great job everyone, rates are going to go up. And the reason rates would have to go up in that scenario is 80 to 90% of our costs are completely independent of how much water you use. Maintaining all that infrastructure. If you're gone in the summer on a vacation, that infrastructure still has to be maintained. The chemists still have to do the analysis. All the work of this organization continues. There's a small, very marginal cost in like chemicals and power in terms of treating the water and distributing it that is certainly part of the demand cycle. And that's really ideally, probably from an economic standpoint, notwithstanding the conservation, you would strive to have just 10%. I think we're about 60% on usage, somewhere along that line. I'm not sure. I'll probably get challenged to that at the next meeting because maybe it's a bit off. But I think it is a struggle to strive to incentivize through your rate structure conservation. We do have tiered rates that's designed to do that, yet not have your finances dependent on usage and have to come back and say, and this is a brutal thing that occurs in the industry in times of drought. Many agencies mandate reductions as they're greatly increasing rates because they haven't had the right balance in their rate structure, and that doesn't go over too well. But it is a challenge for the industry.
Question, what's the theory behind burying the cost of the CMF in the property tax bill?
Yeah, so built into that, the Barry word I kind of appreciate, and what we have heard some of those comments, and as I understand it, and I say as I understand it because, right, this, even though I own it and very much support it, some of this was developed prior to me coming here, but the intent is to, if you think about, as Paul was saying, some of these investments are generational, they're long-term. Having a great quality water, resilient water system that is not just in terms of your potable use, but in terms of fire protection, adds to the value of your property. So renters, and this is arguable as all of this is certainly, but renters may be here, business tenants may be here for a year, 2, 5, over the long term. They don't benefit in the same way that property owners do in terms of a resilient, well-operating water system. Yet, in response to some of these comments along the lines of yours, sir, the board has decided to, at least for the first 2 initial years, to put it on the bi-monthly bill.
Well, the board hasn't approved that yet, but let's assume they will.
Hi, I'm over here. Yoo-hoo. I just read the grand jury wildfire preparedness report, which was awesome. Thank you. In it, I read that MMWD has only cleared 30 acres a year for 21,000 acres. That blew my mind. If we're in a horrible place, I live in Fairfax, so I'm up near that ridge. And you want to put 1 million, I believe I read in the budget? Is that annual or is that for the 4 years?
No, that's an increase in our current investment of at least $1 million a year supported by this fee.
Okay, for me, that's a drop in the bucket. Absolutely. I'm really upset about that. And right now you've got the grand jury who's backing up a lot of information that we did not have before. So I'm asking you really relook at that. I mean, safety is always first in a community. That's one issue I just wanted to point out. Secondly, what is the debt service annual for all the millions and all your old debt? What is your percent annual? What is the percent and how much is it a year in millions that the ratepayers will have to pay back?
Currently,
Proposed.
well, we're proposing not to increase the debt, so it would be approximately what it currently is. That number is,
Maybe I could help a little
it's
bit.
around 9-10 million a year, I believe, somewhere around that.
A lot depends on how the bond's principal schedule is to be paid.
I'm saying based on the current
Yeah.
principle of the bond.
You,
Thanks,
you
Paul.
could do 3% a year or 4% a year interest rate on $200 million. That'd be $6 million of interest.
That should be really helpful to the public.
And with that schedule and with amortizing the principal over 30 years, it would be less than the $16.5 million a year that is being proposed to be paid out of your pocket, which would fund it in 10 years, funding 50-year life assets with 10-year investment money. So over the life you pay interest, but your monthly bill or your bi-monthly bill would be less, and you'd be paying that interest way out in the future with cheap dollars.
I would like to prompt a little more discussion here about the fairness of the proposed plan and how that relates to the notices that have been sent out. It seems that most people on the street would say that they think the usage would be the fairest approach, and it seems like you have prioritized the predictability of the water district's revenues over people's idea of fairness, but now you have an inertia problem in that there is a Prop 218 notice that has been sent out, so in order to come up with a different plan, you kind of have to start over. One of the things that people have to decide right now is whether they want to send in a protest notice, and that's their only way, really, that's the only vote they get. And so a Prop 218 notice has been sent out, and now there's a lot of discussion of, well, the district is hearing all of the flack.
I'm trying to
Let me
get to the
just-
question,
I'm-
because we're
I'm-
running out
I'm-
of time,
I'm-
Amy.
I'm trying to get to the question.
Okay.
So a Prop 218 notice has been sent out. People have to make an informed decision about whether they object or not. And now the board is talking about different changes. They haven't been to the proposal. They haven't been voted upon. So how are people supposed to know how this really affects them and whether or not they should protest, given that probably any final decisions about how exemptions will be distributed, what the process is going to be, who might get them, will be within 2 weeks of the final rate hearing. Thank you.
So I think you started that most people on the streets believe usage. I don't know if that's based on a survey or what. The 218 notice is designed to be the ceiling of the impact to the customers. And the board has always here considered public comments and often reduced their proposal. As recently as 2 years ago, there was a proposal for 2 years of a 7% rate increase in the 218, yet what went forward was just a 1-year increase of 7%. So it's the best I can do that the board is trying to do their best to be responsive to the needs of the organization as they hear comments and input from the community, and certainly the board would be prohibited from increasing the potential impact to customers.
Okay, let's try and get a couple more quick questions in.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It's kind of a worry what's happening. A lot of people have been upset in the IJ. So I have a question. The municipalities that are allowed to be put on your tax bill, I already have a $750 a year increase from the sanitary districts. And my question is this really representative of what you can do to taxpayers without having it sort of tax without representation? Now, how does this work? Is it just in the charter or what?
As I understand it, this is in the California State Constitution that carves out essential services of not going to a vote, but to the process in the 218, which is 50% plus one of your customers would have to lodge a protest.
So that's why you're after the May 28th.
That's why what?
That's why the May 28th questionnaire, or it has to be 50% of us to say we don't want to put it on taxes.
Right, that's correct.
Okay, and now the other question is, to my knowledge, that bill of $750 has increased over the last few years that I've been paying attention. Is that true? Can you just
The sanitation district.
Sanitation, I'm saying, can you do the same? You can.
We would have to go through another Prop 218 effort, other than built into the current 218 notice, to be clear, the fee is the 218 indicates that the fee would go up at a construction index, is called ENR. But anyway, it's a construction index, and that's capped at 4%. So for the next 5 years, the maximum this fee would go up is 4% a year, but possibly lower based certainly on this construction
Well, certainly
inflation
the sanitary
index.
district has taken advantage of this. I'm sure that the MMWD will be. It seems grossly unfair. We already pay very high taxes. Okay?
All right, one or two.
In line with that, a bit over the 50%, you slid over that rather smoothly. In order to find out what that number was, it took me 9 consecutive days of writing and calling each day 2 members of your legal department and Emma, who I will say readily was the only one who was as receptive as she could be. Just to get that number that you are requiring people to meet in order to make that protest. That number, this is just an example of some of the emails that I sent and received. My question was, what is the number that has been determined to be a majority? From Mary Casey. Thank you for your email. Proposition 218, which is contained in Article X111D6 of the California Constitution, applies to the fees. The majority protest requirement is contained in Proposition 218. That did not give me the number. I had to do my own research.
Did you have a question for me, or?
Yeah, well, okay. Then I think this is indicative of what the people are confronted with when they want to protest. And I think it's unreasonable, as was stated here. It's unfair. Okay, I will. All right, after the 9 days, I finally got an answer from one of your legal people. And he said that number is, and it's as low as he could come, 28,671 people. They have to either send it in by snail mail or personally deliver it. Try personally delivering it anytime after the hours or beyond the hours of 8 and 4. You try doing that on the weekend, that's not going to happen because you don't even have a mail slot. Okay, they're shutting me up. I have a lot more to say, but there we go.
No, we just need to make sure we get a question to the speakers is all. All right, one more over here.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation and congrats on your new job. Quick question. Of the capital improvements you're talking about here over the next 10 years or more, what portion of that is really represented by what I would call catch-up? Because as your chart showed that for a period of time in the 90s and maybe later, there weren't really any rate increases. Since 2 of the members of your board has very long tenures, one I think has been there 14 years, another 20-some years, it would be hard for me to understand how that took place. So what percentage is catch-up versus current capital improvements?
Catch-up.
I mean, do you have a feel for that?
Yeah, I would say it's fair to look at that we have an infrastructure deficit. Also, to be fair, I'm not familiar of any water agency or public agency broadly that doesn't have a capital infrastructure deficit. And the plan going forward, there's current plans with specific projects for 10 years, but this is going to go out for decades to come, this level of investment, and it's likely to go up. This doesn't include work on the dams. Dams don't last forever. This doesn't include major work on upgrading our treatment plants. Those plants are relatively newer, but they aren't going to last forever. There are very big challenges that face us, and sure, some of it absolutely, and it's not an exact science. We are moving forward with we have it, but we're going to enhance it, an asset management program that's going to be more data-driven in terms of the priorities, because that's really where we are. Year to year, we have to ensure we're making the right calls, given the age and condition of our system, to ensure we don't add to that deficit. And there's more and more science out there. You can do microscopy to the pipes and tanks. Anyway, so we're going to move to more and more data-driven in terms of the priority of this investment. And I do think it's fair to expect over time it probably will be going up. And we are reserving some of our debt capacity for the unexpected. And I assure you, in my business, the unexpected does occur. We don't have a good deal of reserves. So when there's a natural disaster, when there's a failure or a problem in the dams, or a reservoir that unexpectedly has some sort of damage, we need to be able to tap the markets to bring in additional money, that money will be spread over time in debt. So that is part of the strategy going forward.
Ben, I just wanted to ask one last point. Technically, if you could clear this up. You were talking about the fact that certain meters might have been selected by homeowners who expected a larger capacity, and if a new homeowner came in and didn't need that capacity, they could apply to have the meter reduced or just decide to do it. And my understanding is that in certain cases of remodels or enlargements or whatever of homes, the local planning authorities require that a higher flow rate meter be installed or a larger meter be installed, and that's not the choice of the homeowner. So in a case like that, you can't go back, as I understand it. Is that right?
Yes, that's accurate, and I ran over quickly the current considerations the board is making. There is one specifically to address that issue, where the board has instructed staff to develop a process for in the cases where there's a non-discretionary upsize of the meter, and it is namely fire sprinklers, that the fee would be reduced, assuming that the number of fixtures wouldn't drive it to that size anyway. But there certainly are cases, and it is namely fire sprinklers, and the plan is to have a process to address this. About 6% of our customers, residential customers, as we understand it, but of course over time that number would increase as more folks do remodels. So it is reflective, I believe, of the board listening to the public and doing their best to address the key issues that are being raised.
Terrific. Let me thank Ben and Paul for their presentations. Thank you all for coming. I don't know if you can hang around a few minutes afterward. Maybe if you didn't have a chance to get your questions answered, the speakers will be still available. Hope to see you next month, and thanks for coming.